Welcome to the Superpowers for Good show. I'm your host, Devin Thorpe. Margret Trilli, CEO of ImpactAssets, joins us today to talk about her work. Since joining the nonprofit impact investment firm, she's tripled assets under management and helped deploy $400 million for good during the pandemic. She'll also teach us how to master her superpower, strategy development and implementation. Margret, thanks for coming back. It's so great to see you again. I really appreciate you joining me.
My pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, the pleasure is all ours. Please, would you just take a minute and give us an update on things at ImpactAssets? You do amazing work there. We'd love to know more about how things are going, especially within your sphere of influence.
Oh, sure. We're having so much fun. So, as you know, ImpactAssets is an impact investing firm. We're a nonprofit. We run a donor advised fund, but we also advise philanthropists and other types of programming, all with the mission of increasing the adoption of impact investing. And I think the last time we spoke, we were around 400 million in assets, and we're now at 1.5 billion.
Wow.
So tremendous growth, which has been so fun, and so it's been challenging in a great way. We were already working on scale and getting ready for exponential growth, so it all kind of happened at the same time, and it was really great to see it all come together. And then, as everyone is aware, the last 12 to 18 months have just been so unprecedented in terms of the things that we collectively have been facing in humanity and as a nation. And we've had pandemics, we've had movements, we've had weather, we've had all kinds of, we've had elections, we've had all kinds of things that have really activated our clients in ways that we haven't seen before. And particularly in the pandemic, our clients were asking us, what do? We know how to do racial equity. We know how to do climate change. No one's ever really focused on a pandemic. Actually, there are few.
Yes.
And so at that point in time, we really had to, we were looking at volume, some weeks 400 times what we're used to seeing. We're looking at our staffing. 12 of our 35 people are homeschooling small children, in the early days, just babysitting because there was no school, and trying to hold down full-time jobs. And we had just a tremendous challenge from a capacity perspective, just looking at increased volume and reduce capacity. And our clients are looking to us to play a really important role in how to move money during a pandemic. And we gave it some long, hard thought. We went to the board with an ask to increase expenses in this really scary time when the market's tanking and our revenue is tanking, to increase expenses and increase staff to meet the demands on the grant making side, and to really step into a new role in engaging on creating a strategy for how to address the pandemic with philanthropic dollars and with impact investing dollars, and play a role only that philanthropy and impact investing can play in a crisis like that. And I'm grateful and really proud of the board for supporting us in that strategy at a time where we really were able to step up and do what we were built to do. In 2020 and the months after, we moved more than 200 million in grants and more than 200 million in impact investments. So 400 million in total.
Wow.
To causes that people cared about last year. The majority of that was in sort of pandemic relief related money movement, but quite a bit also went to racial equity and all the other wonderful causes that our clients support. So it's been a big year and a half.
Yes, it has been. It has been. And so thank you for taking the time to update us and share that with us. One of the things that I think would really help our audience, and many in the audience are working in the investment field, and they get this, but others come from the nonprofit side or they're social entrepreneurs, and they're still trying to figure this out. And Give us an example of one of your favorite impact investments and walk us through a little bit about how it worked and what drives the impact.
Well, the one that immediately comes to mind is a program. It was a 5-year program that we've just wrapped up. Originally, we raised $12 million in a microfinance and agricultural finance, notes program that was going to work around the globe to do micro lending to individuals, small businesses, solopreneurs, people living in poverty, and also smallholder farmers. And the program, over the course of the 5 years, lent out 5 times the original capital raise. So just about 63 million in loans to just under 1 million people. And it really does sort of underscore the power of impact investing. You're not just giving money to people. In that case, we would have done 1/5 of the impact with, impacting 1/5 of the lives. But every time we made a loan and it got paid back, we made another loan, and we made five times the loans in the course of that 5-year period, and touched almost 1 million lives. And it really is, the people on this planet who need it the most. And so that's one of the programs I'm most proud of. And it's a really good, I think, succinct articulation of how many of the impact investing programs work.
Sure. It is an amazing thing to think about. And whether you are super rich or almost broke, the idea of being able to invest, maybe for even a good financial return, and know that your money is just on an ongoing basis causing good to happen. Wow, that's an amazing thing, isn't it?
It really is. It really is. And you make a good point. There's that notes program I just talked about was yielding about 2.5% over that 5-year period. There are programs that are similar. There's an organization called Water Equity that does something similar with a really unique structure. But the equity holders in that fund are getting low teens returns, and
Wow.
and in a 7-year period. So there are some really good examples of both ends of the spectrum to fit all investment profiles, all of them
Yeah.
having really great impact.
Water Equity is one that we are featuring in the book. Gary was a guest on the show,
I
and so
love
we're
Gary.
profiling that great case. So I'm glad you mentioned them. That's perfect
Yes,
synergy.
definitely one of my favorites.
This is an amazing, wonderful world to begin to circulate in, where I begin to feel like it's a shrinking world just because I get to know more people. I love it. Let's talk about your superpower now. And you are really, all that in a bag of chips. You're a big deal. And so we're really grateful to have the opportunity to talk to you. But you talked about your unique ability is in vision and strategy paired with execution. Your ability to think big, strategic thoughts, and then actually work on the implementation and execution. And you're right, that's hard for a lot of people. That most people tend to be one or the other a little bit. Let's talk a little bit about how you use that pairing to drive impact and do more good in the world.
Yeah, well, it's now sort of just how I do things, but it definitely wasn't always that way. I think what makes it, makes the results better than when I did do it this way, is that sometimes it's really easy to come up with a vision and a strategy that is, maximizing everything, but not really taking into account what it actually looks like to do those things. And often those strategies take into consideration things like return on investment or how much it'll cost, those things. But really, if you're thinking through the steps at a very detailed level in execution, you're thinking about ways things will fall apart. Or is this really something our culture would embrace? Would there be too much friction? Would our legal team absolutely have a heart attack if we propose these things or doing it in this way? And you start to circle back and iterate on the strategy till you get something that's going to have open road and really get through to execution and implementation and completion in the fastest way with a realistic budget that actually does come to fruition. And you might still be getting those outsized best highest returns. You might be, settling for something, that looks a little different, but is feasible. Whereas that outsized vision without the execution sometimes can lead you to not complete a strategy and lose time and waste resources, or you get all the way, three-quarters of the way through and you realize you have to do a hard pivot, which is costly and time consuming. And so it's just been my, the way I've done these, really to invest the time up front, to talk to the people who are actually going to be implementing the strategies and thinking through how they actually play out.
But you make this perfectly clear that by doing these together, by thinking through these both sides, the realities of implementation and execution, along with the vision and strategy, you make the vision and strategy better and more workable, and you eliminate at least some of the problems that would come up. So that's genius, and I appreciate
I
you
don't think
sharing
it's
that. Now,
genius.
it is. Let's reflect for a minute. You mentioned that you didn't always approach it this way.
Right.
How have you learned to bring these two sides together and to be good at both sides? How have you learned that?
Well, I started in execution. So I had the perspective of trying to implement someone else's strategy. And we were, not given strategies that had any thought about execution, and we were sort of left with this gap of like, okay, figure out how to go get it done. And oftentimes it does, I've just seen all the ways that things can fall apart, or sort of lose the focus or lose the point of why you were setting out to do something in the first place. And so having lived through that from an execution side of things, when I got into corporate strategy after business school, it was something that was really top of mind for me. And after business school, I had the opportunity to continue that learning from my colleagues, who came from BCG, Bain, and McKinsey, all organizations with really strong frameworks and approaches for developing strategy. But it's the opposite. Everybody that works there starts in strategy and works their way up, and then they go into implementation. Like, they know they don't have the execution skills, and that's the next step that everybody wants to take when they leave those firms. But none of those strategies, I can't say none of them, but many times those strategies, they don't have the mandate to take it through to execution. That's up to the client to figure that out. And so I had the benefit of both sides. I learned from those colleagues in setting up the strategies. And then as I learned the frameworks and tools from them, I had my experiences to sort of layer in, as I'm breaking down what those pieces of the implementation look like. I'm then reiterating on the strategy. And there were many times when I actually did retreat from a direction, thinking through how the legal department is going to respond to this. How, what does that mean from a compliance perspective? Do we have the appetite to take that on as an organization? And if not, then is there a different outcome or a different direction we could head in that could also achieve these goals, and that doesn't have, it isn't fraught with all of those entanglements. So I think, I guess that was my path. I think the answer to your question is really for people to spend time in both places. I have no doubt that the really brilliant people at BCG, Bain, and McKinsey get there too, because they have those building blocks in their careers as well. And I think there's a lot to be said for the institutional approach that those big firms bring. But that's where I learned it. There's plenty of books that they've all published on them. I'm sure people can find them and read those too.
Yeah, there's lots of books. Most tend to be guides on how to do one or the other, right?
Yeah.
How to be super efficient, how to be operational, or how to be strategic, how to create a vision and a strategy. And so there is still a pretty fundamental dichotomy that you have figured out how to bring together. And I'm not going to say there are no books and no one's ever done this before, but you're right to identify this as something that is at least unusual, if not truly unique. If you were guiding someone at any stage of their career, trying to develop this now, and having now heard from you how powerful this is, how helpful this is, everyone will want to do it. Some have the potential to do it as well as you. How would you encourage them to learn and develop these skills and to bring this all together like you've done?
Well, I think it's a matter of having, just like you said, there's books written on both. And I think just making sure that the strategy incorporates thinking through how it would get implemented and having that be an explicit part of the process, and really thinking through all of those steps, and having the courage really to, look yourself in the mirror if it seems like the implementation is going to hit some major roadblocks or things that, risks or just even internal pushback that isn't going to get it over the finish line. Having the fortitude to really be able to revisit it. Sometimes you get through that visionary piece of work, and you get so wed to the vision that you just want to be done. So you really have to,
Yeah.
you have to think of done. That's really the first iteration, and done is after that second iteration with the strategy. And then in terms of building the skills to where it's innate, I think I would just echo what I just said, which is I think dedicating parts of your career to execution and to strategy, and having an explicit focus on developing both and integrating both, I think is easy enough to get there.
I see. Now, as you think about these two different paths that you contrasted, the kind of the BCG Bain model where you are strategy, vision focused, and your path, you came up through, at least initially, through more of an execution oriented path.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe we can just talk about how each of those folks learn the other skill. So maybe we start with the BCG folks, because in a way, I suspect there were times, at least earlier in your career, when you talk about implementing someone else's strategy and tripping over some of the difficulties that they created for you in that strategy. How would you coach them to learn about the practicalities and issues in execution?
That's a really good question. My knee-jerk reaction is that both disciplines, even though the outcomes are very different, both disciplines draw on the same concept of breaking down the work, just fundamentally breaking down the work. A vision and a strategy is about, setting a really big, hairy, audacious goal, and then breaking down what are the ways to get there, which are the ones, should we discard, which are the ones should we keep, and then breaking those down, and then sifting further and breaking it down and sifting. And it's the very same with execution. You have a big project or a big goal that you need to execute. You have to break the work down into little pieces so that you can delegate them to the people who actually have to do the work, and you lay it on a timeline, and you plan it out. And it's the same principle in both places, just applied very differently. One to a concept and working through an approach or an answer to a problem, and the other breaking down work.
I love the way you responded to that, because I think you responded in a way that will resonate with folks from that background, right? So the strategists, the visionaries are going to say, "Oh, I get it. I take this skill that I have, twist it around a little bit, and I can deploy it in a way that will help me with the execution." Okay, now let's flip the script again and think about the message you'd give someone who came up as you did, more from the execution side, to help them think about vision and strategy when maybe that's something they haven't been tasked with before, and now they want to assume more of that responsibility. How do they learn that?
I think there are always opportunities. Most organizations, there are opportunities if you're in an operational role or an accounting role, even like to evaluate process and systems and technologies and improve them for efficiency, also to reduce risk in the process. And those are opportunities to think strategically, to set a vision for how things should look, to re-examine a process. If you map out the flows of a process and you want it to have less boxes and lines, you have to think about where you do the cutting, and what is going to get you to the same high level outcomes that you want, but just with less steps. So that's a way to transition. At least certainly that was my path, was really process reengineering, thinking about and manually, like from all levels process. How do you automate it? How do you put in technology? How do you re-envision the procedures? In our case, how do you globalize the process? Because we became a global firm overnight, and we had 5 groups on 5 continents doing the same work. So how could we pass the book around the clock? So we had a 24-hour operation, but nothing was redundant. So there's lots of ways and opportunities for folks to kind of edge into that, and it does start with painting that picture and painting that strategy. The other thing I didn't mention for the strategic minded folks, I think, would
Mm-hmm.
be to not underestimate the people and the politics in the organization. It's not enough to just break down the work. You really need to anticipate who's got what motivations, and not from a malicious political standpoint, but really, if somebody's role is risk management in the organization, what are the things they're going to be worried about? What are the concerns that they're going to have? How are you going to address them? What is your communication plan? How are you going to get out ahead of that? Are you going to meet with those people ahead of time before it goes to the operating committee, or wherever else it's going for approvals? So just really thinking through the people elements of both places. And I think the folks on execution side may or may not be aware that those are the factors that can make or break success, but they certainly are living it.
Yeah.
And I think it's something for both to think about.
Well, I think that was a really good addendum to your earlier answer on the how to take the strategy and build it into the execution side, because I think you identified one of the, if not blind spots, dim spots, the dark corners that strategists don't always see, is to think through some of those realities. And, and I like the way you say, don't underestimate the executioners, or the people who are doing the execution. I'm not sure we should call them executioners.
No.
But I also loved your answer about developing that strategic muscle, that vision muscle, if you are on the execution side, because you're so right. There are lots of things that go on that are very strategic, that people who are doing that work are accustomed to doing, or can become accustomed to doing. But part of it is to recognize how strategic it is, and to begin to just increase the vision that's applied, the scope, the breadth, and soon you can be thinking about strategies for the entire organization.
That's
so
right.
I love that answer. Great answer. That's going to be very helpful to people who are listening, watching, and reading. So thank you.
I'm glad. Yeah. It is funny. I think most people want to be more strategic. I often hear people say, I want to move into a more strategic role. And I think, oh my gosh, everything you're doing is strategic. And it's such a nebulous thing. People don't actually really know that they're doing it when they're doing it, or know what it is when they see it. It really simply is, articulating how you're going to get from A to B.
Yeah. It's in that anytime you're doing planning, chances are there's a strategic element that is or should be there. And so building that muscle, even at the simple operational level, wherever you may be today will help you build that muscle to apply it later on in the future in a broader context when you have more responsibility or launch your own thing. So that's brilliant. It's a really powerful insight, Margret. Thank you. Thank you very, very much. Well, Margret, it's been a thrill to have you. Thank you for taking the time to catch up, and thank you for taking the time to help us see how and really what seemed so daunting, what seemed so unique, so impossible 20 minutes ago now seems so easy. And so I hope you appreciate the impact you've had today by helping people who will learn from you how to be more strategic, how to be more execution minded, and cross-pollinating those disciplines. So thank you. Thank you very much.
Oh, thanks, Devin. I hope it was helpful.
Really appreciate you taking the time to be with us. So we wish you every success in what you're doing. Before you go, maybe if you'd like, take 30 seconds or a minute and tell people how they can learn more about impact assets and connect with you on social media or more personally, if you like.
Sure. So you can find Impact Assets at impactassets.org. We're also on Twitter and LinkedIn. There's lots of content that we send out that way as well. There's lots of white papers and thought pieces there as well. And I'm on LinkedIn, Margret Trilli at, I think it's just Margret Trilli.
Yeah. Fantastic.
Maybe we
Margret,
do that
again, thank you. Thank you so much for being with us today. We really appreciate it. And we wish you all the success in what you're continuing to do to make the world a better place.
Thanks, Devin.
All righty. Let's do some good. Thank you for tuning in to the Superpowers for Good show. Twice each week, we host changemakers who share their impact, insights, and superpowers. Don't miss another episode. Subscribe today at superpowersforgood.com. That's superpowers 4 good.com. Don't forget, get your copy of the book, Superpowers for Good, as an ebook, audiobook, paperback, or hardcover edition via your favorite online retailer.